Hi, my name is Kevin Jones. Welcome to this talk on using Dynamic Authentication Providers in Duende IdentityServer with AdminUI. So Duende IdentityServer lets us add OIDC providers dynamically. And by doing this, it means we can load these providers from a store without redeploying this solution. To do this, we must add some database configuration, which can be tricky and error-prone. But AdminUI makes things easy. So AdminUI provides a guided wizard to let us dynamically add these providers. Now, at the moment, we can only add OIDC providers. Support for SAML providers will come later in 2023. Now, one other thing to note is that this mechanism is available only in the Enterprise edition of Duende IdentityServer. Okay, so let's go and see how we can do this. So here we are at the AdminUI home screen. I'm running the Rock Solid Knowledge all-in-one Docker image. And I've logged on with the default user and I've created an account to use. So from here, if I hit the login button, that takes me to the default login screen. And notice here we only have the default login. So from here, I can enter my username and my password and log in, but there are no other options. So my username here is Kevin. I have a password. And if I enter that and click on login, then we are now inside AdminUI and I can administer IdentityServer. And notice that one of the options here is dynamic authentication. So from here, I can add a dynamic provider. So I click on the Add button. At the moment, we can only add OIDC providers, but we will be able to add SAML providers later this year. If I click on Start, it wants me to add a provider. Now, Duende run a demo server, and I can add a client for this server. And if I come down here, there's this interactive confidential client. Let me just grab that ID. And this uses auth code with Pixie. So if I go back to AdminUI, here we enter two things. We enter our scheme name. Let's just call this Duende, and the display name. And let's just call this Duende IDP. Click on Next. And then we set up the provider. So we need to enter the authority URL, which is the site I just showed you. And that was demo.duendesoftware.com. The client ID I copied from there, and that was interactive.confidential. It was the auth code flow plus Pixie. If I go next, we can add some scopes here. So let's add the profile scope. The OpenID scope is added by default. So I click on Add, go next again. We need the client secret. And if I check back on that site, the client secret is just the word secret. I come back to here. So we add in secret as the client secret. Click on next, check the values here, and click on save. So we now have this dynamic authentication scheme added into IdentityServer. So I've now gone to an incognito tab in my browser, and I've gone to the same AdminUI endpoint. Again, if I click on Login, that takes me to the login screen, but notice now we have a link to the external Duende IDP login. So if I click on that, that takes me off to the demo site for Duende IdentityServer. And notice here to log in, we can use either the username of Bob with a password of Bob, or the username of Alice with a password of Alice. So if I use Bob to log in and click on Login, and that takes me back to the IdentityServer login, where it's telling me that we have no local user linked to this external login. So from here, I can now link my user, which is Kevin. So type in my username and my password. Click on Login. And sure enough, I'm now logged in as Kevin. So from here, if I log out and then close all my incognito tabs, create a new incognito tab and go back to AdminUI, And this just clears all the cookies and any cache data that we have. So it's like we're doing a fresh login on a new device. Click on Login. Again, go to the Duende IDP. Enter the Duende details, so Bob, and click on Login. Then sure enough, we now logged in as Kevin, as we can see here. So I've linked my local user, Kevin, via the Bob user on Duende Identity Server, and I can now log in using this authentication provider that we've added using the dynamic authentication mechanism inside Duende Identity Server with a wizard driven by AdminUI.